Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel. We are here with Psychology Chapter 2, Part 3. So let's get started. Assessment of personality. Now, in our personal lives, we try to judge and understand the personality of other people on basis of our observation, our past experiences with those people, and also what information we have heard about them from other people. But this is a relatively informal effort. So we have to organize our efforts more formally so that there are no personal biases. So formal effort aimed at understanding personality is known as personality assessment. Now, apart from understanding personality, it will also help us in placement, diagnosis, counseling, training, and other purposes. Moving on. Self-report measures. Now, Gordon Allport said that when we have to understand the personality of the person, the best thing is to ask the person about himself or herself. Now, these methods are fairly structured methods, which means that they follow a set procedure. They require the subject to give responses verbally, and they also require the subject to report his or her own feelings. That is why they are known as self-report measures. Also, to keep in mind, these are direct techniques. And they are scored in quantitative terms, which means that every answer has a set score. And they are interpreted on the basis of already set norms. So some examples are MMPI, EPQ and 16PF, which we will discuss in detail later. Moving on. So the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory was developed by Hathaway and McKinley as a tool for psychiatric diagnosis. However, it was found more effective in identifying varieties of psychopathology. So the revised version consists of 567 statements. Now the respondent has to say either true or false to these statements. And this is divided into 10 subscales. Moving on. Ising's personality questionnaire, which was developed by H.J. Isings. Now we have already studied about this in our part 1 video. So he gave us 3 dimensions, which are introverted, extroverted, emotionally stable, neurotic, psychotic and sociable. Then we move on to 16 personality factor questionnaire by Raymond Cattell. About this also we've studied in our part 1 video. Now he used the statistical technique of factor analysis to identify 16 primary characteristics. And this is a multiple choice questionnaire. So you have to choose from a given set of alternatives. And this is very helpful in career guidance and occupational testing. Moving on. Now let's discuss what are the problems that are associated with self-report measures. So first of all is social desirability. तो इन सेल्फ रिपोर्ट मेजर्स में रिस्पोंडेंट उस हिसाब से आंसर करता है जो सोशली एक्सेप्टेबल मैनर होता है रादर दैन जो एक्चुअली सच होता है. तो वो उस हिसाब से आंसर करता है जो बाकी लोगों को अच्छा लगेगा सुनने में. दैट इज़ वाई ही आंसर्स इन अ सोशली डिज़ायरेबल मैनर विच डिफीट्स द पर्पस ऑफ द टेस्ट. देन वी हैव एक्विएसेंस. इसका मतलब है कि वो इर्रिस्पेक्टिव ऑफ द क्वेश्चन, इसका मतलब वो क्वेश्चन को ध्यान नहीं दे रहा, उसके अलावा सब पे येस 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 बोले जा रहा है. सो दैट इज़ अगेन अ प्रॉब्लम एंड यू नो दैट विल क्वेश्चन द क्रेडिबिलिटी ऑफ द आंसर्स. And we have to also keep in mind that personality testing requires great skill under a trained expert. So, you know, an untrained person cannot do psychological testing. Moving on. प्रोजेक्टिव टेक्निक्स. तो अभी तक हमने जो भी पढ़ा वो डायरेक्ट मेथड्स थे, बट नाउ दीज आर इनडायरेक्ट मेथड्स बिकॉज दे थ्रो लाइट इनटू द अनकॉन्शियस. नाउ वी नो दैट लार्ज पार्ट ऑफ ह्यूमन बिहेवियर is governed by unconscious motives or feelings that we are not aware of. So let's discuss the features of projective techniques. First of all, the stimuli is very less structured. And a variety of stimuli is also used. For instance, words, ink blots, sentences, pictures, drawings. A lot of stimuli is used. Then the subject is not told about the purpose of assessing. And he is also told that यहाँ पे कोई सही या गलत आंसर्स नहीं है. And each response will reveal a significant aspect of the person's personality. And the scoring is very lengthy and subjective. Moving on. So the first test of this kind is Rorschach ink blot test, which was developed by Hermann Rorschach. Now it has 10 symmetrical ink blots. So what do we mean by symmetrical? For instance, in the picture below, if we cut it into half, the left and the right half will be exactly similar. That is why it is symmetrical. So there are 5 black and white ink blots, 2 red ink blots, and there are 3 in pastel colors. Now each of them is printed at the center of a white cardboard of this size. Now this is made by, first of all, we drop ink on the paper, then we fold it into a half. That is why we get a symmetrical ink blot. Now it is done in 2 phases. फर्स्ट इज परफॉर्मेंस प्रॉपर, जहाँ पे रिस्पॉन्डेंट को कार्ड्स दिखाते हैं और उनसे पूछते हैं कि आपको इसमें क्या दिख रहा है. नाउ नेक्स्ट इज इंक्वायरी, जिसमें एक ज़्यादा डिटेल्ड रिपोर्ट लेते हैं उस रिस्पॉन्स की कि वेयर, हाउ एंड ऑन व्हाट बेसिस डिड दैट पर्सन मेक दैट जजमेंट. Now a fine judgment is required in this test and also computer techniques have been developed. Moving on. Thematic A-perception test by Morgan and Murray. So now this is relatively more structured than the ink blot test. It has 30 black and white picture cards and 1 blank card. तो इसमें बहुत सारे लोगों को बहुत सारी अलग अलग टाइप की सिचुएशंस में दिखाया जाता है इन कार्ड्स में. नाउ सम कार्ड्स आर यूज्ड विद स्पेसिफिक पीपल, विच मीन्स दैट सर्टन कार्ड्स आर ओनली यूज्ड विद यंग गर्ल्स और सर्टन कार्ड्स आर ओनली यूज्ड विद एडल्ट मेल्स. नाउ 20 cards are generally enough. However, 5 cards have also been used successfully in understanding the personality of a person. Now, these cards are presented one by one and the person is asked to tell a story around that picture. What led up to the situation, आगे क्या होगा, characters क्या सोच रहे हैं, ये सब भी उनसे पूछा जाता है. Moving on. We have Rosenzweig picture frustration test. Now, this test contains cartoon-like pictures in which the characters are involved in frustrating situations. Now, the respondent is asked that what will the frustrated person in this particular situation do. Now, when the people will interpret his or her responses, they will see that what type of aggression is shown and on whom the aggression or frustration is shown. And they will also see that whether the respondent is focusing on the frustrating object or on the protection of the frustrated person or is giving a constructive solution to the problem. Moving on. Sentence completion test. So this is a very easy test. तो इसमें क्या होता है कि वो हमें incomplete sentences दे देंगे, जिसका मतलब है कि वो आगे वाला पार्ट दे देंगे और हमें बाद वाला पार्ट कंप्लीट करना होगा. Now, how we complete the end part is what will reflect our personality. And what are our motivations, what are our problems, what are our attitudes. And since it is a projective technique, it will help us reveal our unconscious motivations. For example, my father is dash, my greatest fear is dash, etc. Moving on. Draw a person test. Now, in this, the subject is asked to draw the figure of a person and then draw a person of the opposite gender. And then the person is asked to build up a story around that person. Now let's see the examples of interpretation that this test will have. So if the person has, not drawn certain facial features, it means that the person is hiding certain problematic relationships. And if there is a lot of graphic emphasis on the neck, it means that the person has no control over impulses. If there's a large head, it suggests that the person has a brain disease or has a preoccupation with headaches. Moving on. Behavioral analysis. तो जब भी हम किसी से मिलते हैं, हम उनके बिहेवियर से उनकी पर्सनालिटी आइडेंटिफाई करने की कोशिश करते हैं और किसी हद तक हम वो सक्सेसफुली कर भी सकते हैं. तो उनकी पर्सनालिटी रिफ्लेक्ट उनके बिहेवियर से होती है. दैट इज़ वाई जो ऑब्जर्वेशन ऑफ बिहेवियर है वो बेसिस है बिहेवियरल एनालिसिस का. सो नाउ लेट्स डिस्कस सम प्रोसीजर्स. सो द फर्स्ट वन इज इंटरव्यू. नाउ दिस इन्वॉल्व्स टॉकिंग टू द असेसी and asking questions. So there are 2 types of interviews. First is unstructured and next is structured. So the structured interview follows a set procedure and very specific questions are asked to the person. Whereas the unstructured interview does not have a set purpose, and the interviewer asks a lot of questions and try to develop an impression about the personality of the person. Moving on, observation. Now, first of all, we also make observations in our daily life. We try to observe and watch other people and see how they are behaving in different situations. However, a trained person is very important for observing behavior, as it is a very sophisticated procedure. And it requires careful training of the observer, and he or she has to have a detailed guideline about the analysis of behavior. तो जैसे कि एक क्लिनिकल साइकोलॉजिस्ट है, वो अपने क्लाइंट के इंटरेक्शंस देखेगी, ऑब्जर्व करेगी अपने फैमिली मेम्बर्स के साथ, और उससे उनको बहुत हेल्प मिलेगी आगे ट्रीटमेंट में. मूविंग ऑन, देन वी हैव लिमिटेशंस ऑफ इंटरव्यू एंड ऑब्जर्वेशन. तो पहली बात तो प्रोफेशनल ट्रेनिंग बहुत ज़्यादा चाहिए इंटरव्यू और ऑब्जर्वेशन के लिए, जो कि बहुत ज़्यादा टाइम कंज्यूमिंग होती है. सेकेंड इज दैट the psychologist who is performing this must be very experienced. And the next is that, a mere stranger can, contaminate the results, and the observation will not be authentic, because how we behave in front of other people is different, and how we behave in our personal lives is different. Moving on, behavioral ratings. Now, these are more frequently used in educational and industrial settings. तो ये जनरली उन लोगों से ली जाती हैं जो रिस्पोंडेंट को बहुत अच्छे से जानते हैं या फिर उनके साथ फ्रीक्वेंटली इंटरैक्ट करते हैं. तो इसमें उन्हें उस इंडिविजुअल को सर्टन कैटेगरीज में डालना होता है डिपेंडिंग ऑन द बिहेवियर ऑफ द पर्सन. नाउ लेट्स डिस्कस इट्स लिमिटेशंस. फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल इज हेलो इफेक्ट. तो हम उस इंसान के एक फेवरेबल या अनफेवरेबल ट्रेट से इतना ज़्यादा बाउंड अप हो जाते हैं, इतना ज़्यादा इन्फ्लुएंस हो जाते हैं कि हमारी जो बाकी सारी बातें भी होती हैं उनके बारे में वो इन्फ्लुएंस हो जाती हैं. फॉर इंस्टेंस, इफ़ वी फील दैट अ पर्सन इज़ फ्रेंडली, वी ऑल्सो अज्यूम दैट द पर्सन मे बी इंटेलिजेंट. सो दिस इज़ नोन एज हेलो इफेक्ट. देन वी कम ऑन टू द मिडल कैटेगरी, बायस. So in this, the person does not avoids giving extreme answers. Rather, it chooses from the middle of the scale generally. So this is the middle category, bias. Then we have extreme response bias, which means that the person only chooses from the extreme positions and does not pay attention to the middle categories that are given on the scale. Moving on, nominations. Now this method is often used for obtaining peer assessment. So इसमें क्या होता है कि हम उन लोगों से पूछते हैं कि tell us the person that you want to play with, that you want to work with, that you want to study with, and that you want to do some other activity with. And then we also ask them कि why did you choose that specific person for that activity. And on the basis of these nominations, we will try to understand the personality and the behavioral qualities of the person. Then one limitation here is that there are personal biases involved. Then we move on to situational tests. So there are a variety of situational tests. However, the situational stress test is the most common of them all. So in this test, the person is put in a stressful situation. For instance, the people who are there are deliberately asked to be non-cooperative and interfering people, so as to see that how the respondent is acting in stressful situations. Now this test involves kind of role playing. Moving on. Thank you everyone for watching the video. Do stay tuned for part 3. Do like, share, comment and subscribe to our channel. Thank you everyone.